Hello and welcome to a special ESPN edition, International Women's Day Roundtable. I am your host, Brittany Mitchell, ESPN reporter and women's sport lead, and I am joined by fellow ESPN reporter Isadora Mcleay. She's also a former AFLW player for the GWS Giants. And beside me, we also have ESPN contributor Mary Kay, creator of Ladies Who League. Down in Melbourne, we have fellow ESPN reporter Marissa Lordanic, and she's also the producer of the Far Post podcast. And Megan Hustwaite joins us, ESPN contributor and WNBL sideline reporter. Thank you all for joining us today on a special edition roundtable for International Women's Day. Of course, International Women's Day, a great time of year to celebrate all things women and women's sport. And today we're just going to talk about a few different things about, what's gone well in women's sport, but also what can be changed, what can be done better. So Mary, why don't I throw to you first, because you have been in the front lines when it comes to NRLW, and it's kind of become Australia's gold standard of women's footy codes. It's up there alongside maybe Super Netball and WNBL, but when it comes to the footy codes, it's kind of taken over in the last few years. Viewership numbers are up, registered numbers are up. I've got a heap of stats here, actually. Average viewership numbers in 143,000 last year in comparison to AFLW, which was 55,000. NRL final matches with an average of 521,000 watched versus 134,000 at the AFLW finals games. Not to deride and compare between the two codes, but obviously these two codes are the gold standard of footy codes, especially in women's sports. So, Mary, what has NRL done right to get, ahead of the pack?
When the NRLW started, there were a lot of comparisons between the approach they were taking versus the AFLW approach. I think they were two very different approaches, and I don't think either was wrong or right, but I was a big fan of what the NRLW did in that we started really small. When the NRLW started, there were just 4 teams. Some people thought it was a bit exhibition-y, and maybe it was. But as we've grown slowly, that means we have enough talent to distribute across the teams, and it means the quality of the product is exceptional. I also think State of Origin has been a really big win for the NRLW. The quality of that game is exceptional. Again, started really slow with just the one game, but we're now in a position where we have a 3-game series, and people love watching it as much as they do the men's.
I mean, I'll throw to you here, George, because you're someone who's on the front line, who's actually played as part of an AFLW team. What are your thoughts about what the competition has done right? They were the forefront.
Yeah, definitely. I thought that their grassroots levels with Auskick and their academy programs like Swans Academy, and they have AFL Academy programs similar to the boys, worked really well. And now you can see that with the younger generation coming through, they're growing up actually playing the sport rather than being code hoppers from netball or basketball. So you're seeing a whole, young girls growing up playing the sport, and you're seeing the whole competition improve. And then in recent years, they've changed the rules, so less rotations, meaning players playing more under fatigue, more goals scored, and you're seeing a big jump in, the goal scoring, which I think's really helped. And I think they've really made it quite a diverse platform for everyone, so everyone's kind of welcome. That I think it's one that a lot of younger people love to get involved in.
Yeah, definitely. I'll throw down to you guys down in Melbourne, Riss, Megan. Riss, you're a part of A-League Women's. What have you seen over the last few years, especially after the Matildas World Cup? What has gone on, and what have we seen in the growth in that area?
Yeah, we can't talk about the A-League Women without talking about the Matildas, and that first season after the World Cup was just magical. We saw record crowds, increase in viewership. It was really, really special. The big thing now is trying to keep that momentum, but the big thing that the A-League Women has done well is make sure that they are continuing to grow. So we've got a full home and away season now, which means there's so many opportunities for Aussie girls to be playing at the top level. And we've got a couple more expansion sides coming in. So again, it's all about creating opportunities for those players to actually play at the top level of soccer in this country.
And yourself, Megan, you're on the front line, literally on the sidelines at WNBL games. What are you seeing when you're down at these games?
I guess the WNBL is as strong as the Opals, and that is the national team who are number 2 ranked in the world after their bronze medal at Paris Olympics. And we're seeing a bit of an era post Lauren Jackson. So obviously she's been huge the last few years, coming back for a home World Cup in 2022 and then having a few seasons in the WNBL where right around the country she was bringing fans in droves and not only playing but then meeting and signing autographs for hours after the game. So we're seeing a lot of the future now, and that is the tagline of the WNBL, the future is here. So it's that next generation of young players who are breaking through into the WNBA, starting their journeys internationally for the Opals and forging what is going to be a new chapter for the WNBL. And we know this league is the oldest professional elite women's competition in Australia.
Right. Well, I mean, it's all well and good to talk about all the positives. And I'm sure we've been doing that for the last few years. But I think it's time we actually get down to the nitty-gritty and talk about what each competition could do better. I don't want to throw you under the bus, Stores, but I guess AFLW, being the trendsetters at the start, they came in very gung-ho. They created this competition. Would you say, as someone on the outside, when I watch AFLW, they expanded really quickly, and I think it came to their detriment. You know, talent wasn't quite there, and you mentioned a lot of things that they've done to try and rectify that.
Well, yeah, I think so. They jumped towards an 18-team competition, but with only 10 rounds, and they did it in the year where they had 2 seasons in 1 year, which was just a rushed mess. And I think they definitely rushed that too early when ground management and facilities still not there, but wasn't there at all. And it was changed to winter, jumping around. A lot of the players don't know each year when the season's starting. So definitely I think they did that sort of 18 jump too early. It's starting to get better with the grassroots growing, but there also needs to be sort of a second-tier competition that's good enough for all players to kind of advance, even if they're not playing. So a lot of teams can be sort of one player goes out, as their star player goes out, that's then done for the season. But if they had more of an outreach to other players in their team, I guess, you know, it wouldn't be the detriment for the rest of the year for them. But yeah, definitely I do think they expanded a bit too early. They're getting better now with the pay slowly going up, but still, yeah.
Can you talk, being a former player, you know, you mentioned that the fact that there was no knowledge about when the competition is actually starting. There was so much talk about the CBA at one stage, pay, things like that. Being an athlete, studying, working, getting to training, and just everything so up in the air, how does that make you feel?
Well, it was just very confusing times. I know there are a lot of the girls who in that 2-season year had already had time off, had used their leave for that first part, and then they had to use it again. And a few of them actually lost their jobs. And these are also people who are firefighters, nurses, you know, they work in the front line, but it's really hard to, you know, in any day work, you can't exactly be like, oh, by the way, I'm going to be on leave for 3 months. So it was a really difficult time. And there's also this last year, after getting knowledgeable, they also decided to try midweek games, which just didn't work at all. And injuries showed that. But yeah, that was another thing that obviously people would have to talk to their bosses, being like, oh, I won't be able to work Tuesday, Wednesday because I'll be in Perth and they're working in Melbourne, sort of thing. Yeah.
You know, it's really interesting for people like us, Mary. We are sitting on the sideline. We're not a part of these discussions and involved in these issues, but we've definitely talked to a lot of athletes who've gone through similar things. Mary, what are your thoughts on where this goes?
Just to Dora's point, it actually makes me really cranky because we see a lot of conversation about the quality of women's sport. I know that I have a full-time job, and when I'm juggling 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 things, I'm definitely not at my best. And we expect these women to show up, advocate for their competitions, be exceptional at what they're doing, while essentially living in job insecurity. And it's just not good enough. And I talk about pay. I think that's really important, but I think we need to broaden the conversation to think about the conditions that women play in, the change rooms. Like, it's not okay for women to be going to facilities and having 3 men's toilets to use. We need to think about insurance, just so it's a good place for them to be able to go and good for them to be mentally happy and to perform at their best, which is what we're expecting them to do.
Yeah, definitely. Bruce, you probably can touch on a few of these things yourself, Megan. A-League women has been in a similar space as well, not getting the provided the right facilities.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like a lot of us are going to be saying the same things, but it's those full-time professionalism standards. So as Mary said, pay, facilities, feeling like you're wanted and respected at work is something we all want, and these athletes are no different. The A-League Women is looking towards full-time professionalism for the 26-27 season. That's what the players want. If the APL comes to the party on that, that's a different story. But especially in a sport like football, where there's international influences that need to be taken into account, those standards need to be met sooner rather than later, because we will keep losing talent.
The same for basketball, and we've seen a lot of basketballers go over to AFLW. There's better conditions for them there, shorter seasons. Another issue we have is, and it's a great thing, is that we have a lot of mums that have returned to basketball, whether that be in the WNBL or with the Opals, where we had 3 mums represent Australia at the Paris Olympics. So just making sure that they've got everything they need to be able to continue to play at an elite level, but also travel with their children on the road. And that comes back to fixturing, travel conditions, the type of flights that they're getting. They're just basics, but when you don't have them, it's really concerning.
Megan, what are your thoughts on the WNBL competition, I guess, the standard right now? For someone who doesn't watch too often, I do come across this idea that it's almost like a regression in talent. Is that a completely ignorant view, or is that something that you may have noticed yourself?
I think this WNBL season has been really interesting because of seasons that have been happening elsewhere. So our elite talent has always played in Europe, where there's big money, and there's now a competition in China with huge money. And then New Zealand have begun their own league, which has become a bit of a rival competition, and a lot of Australians went there. So we still had a lot of Paris Olympians playing the WNBL, which is always going to be a measuring stick. And we still continue to attract top level WNBA imports, and we're seeing them have an influence on the current finals series. So the talent is there in some regards, but it is overall a younger competition. And I think with that inexperience has shone through in a very long competition. That's regular season, but also finals that are best of 3 series.
Is it something that perhaps the general public has to acknowledge, that competitions like WNBL, A-League W, because they are such a global sport, there is a bit of cannibalization? It is almost like the men now. The best of Australians footballers and the best of our basketballers are going to be playing overseas. And maybe it is just acknowledging that these competitions are our feeding grounds.
I think it is definitely the case for football, and we're seeing it more and more. We had a transfer to the new Canadian League just this week for an undisclosed fee, and there's leagues in North America, there's leagues in Europe, and they want Australian talent. The Aussie players want to go over there. So we need to figure out ways to keep players here and make sure that they're getting the same professionalism standards, pay, all of those things to stay down here, because as you said, this is the breeding ground for the next generation of Matildas, and most of them are going to start their careers down here. So we need to make sure that we're making the best possible league to further develop Matildas. And it's not a cheap exercise, but it needs to be done for the sake of the national team. It's
the same with basketball, and it really comes back to the conditions, whether that's the length of the season, the fixture, and is Perth the team that is the furthest away in the league? having a short road trip to Townsville and Sydney, and is that equitable against what other teams are facing? It's the venues that we're playing in, it's the broadcast, it's the time of the game. So those things are so important in whether the best Australian players are staying here or going overseas where they're having better conditions and better pay.
I mean, I guess it's for you guys. It's NRLW, AFLW in particular. There's no competition for these athletes going overseas.
No.
But there is cannibalization within women's sport. In particular, you have girls who now there's any sport on the horizon is a future goal now. You know, a few years ago it was netball, soccer, basketball. Now it's rugby league, AFL, rugby union. Everything is now on a platter. How do these codes, make sure that there's enough talent?
I'm really passionate, Britt, particularly at the moment when these athletes are not full-time professional, that the codes work together. And I've heard really good examples of this happening across the NRLW and the AFLW, but particularly with rugby union and NRLW, when the seasons exist completely separately. I think athletes should be able to do both, and I think it should be encouraged as well. Not only does it help them pay-wise, but it also means that they've got access to high-performance facilities for a longer period of time through the year. Yeah,
definitely. As someone who reports on rugby, as much as I sit here and I'm going, don't take our talent, you're completely right. These women who are playing in Super Rugby Women's, they play for 6 weeks at the start of the year. If they don't make the Wallaroo squad, that's it. Or they're potentially going back to their club competition, Sydney's rugby competition, and then there's one in Brisbane. But unfortunately for them, the standard is just not there. Whereas if you were to be in the Super Rugby Women, play for 6 weeks, and then you get picked up by an NRLW team, that's another 3 months of playing. And I mean, they're different codes, but the transition, I'm sure, is easy enough.
Grace Hamilton did it very well.
Definitely. And there's a few, like Charlotte Caslick gave it a go. A lot of the Aussie Sevens girls have, post their career in the Australian Sevens, have moved to NRLW. So, yeah, this is definitely, I think, all the codes probably need to keep an eye on. But now that the pay is increasing, how do they make sure that they keep that main talent?
I'm smiling at you like a Cheshire cat because I'm thinking about the Levi twins. Can we have them?
Oh, no, they're ours. They are ours. But, Dawes, when you think about AFLW, you mentioned earlier that there was quite a lot of girls who were transitioning from, netballs, soccer. Are you seeing now that over the last 5 years, that's not the case?
Yeah, definitely. It's all people growing up playing football, especially also in New South Wales, I guess, with the Swans Academy and stuff. Used to just be people, coming from touch football, rugby, everything. But now there's like a lot of people growing up playing football, which makes it a lot easier, learning, I guess, everyday lingo of AFL from the coaches and stuff. But just on the sort of, you could be scared to lose players because the Levi twins were originally drafted as Gold Coast Suns and they left.
Can't forget that.
They didn't even, they left and they were good players, but they both left to go Sevens because of better opportunity, travel the world, better money. And then you've also got Irish players in the AFLW. When they're not sure on the season starting, a lot of them like to go home and play Gaelic, but when they are unsure of when the season's starting, they can't do that. And it's kind of like, well, what's their second sport sort of to do? Because they've grown up playing Gaelic, which really transitions well into AFL. But with the season chopping and changing for them, they don't know if they can go home to do that.
It's one thing I've noticed lately when talking, and I mean, I just recently stopped playing rugby, but the girls who were coming through were 16, 17 years old, and talking to them, I would say, when I was younger, I grew up watching Matt Burke, or my favourite player was David Pocock. he's only 5-6 years out of the game. But for these girls, that's not it at all. Their dream, has always been Charlotte Caslick, the Maddie Levi's, and it would be the same across all codes. And for myself, I'm kind of going, you know what, like we've just ridden on what these comps could do better and what's gone wrong, but they've done a whole lot of right as well, and we have to give them some kudos for that.
I agree, Britt, and I think we live in this world and we're all passionate about it. But 5-6 years ago, the question was no one's interested in women's sport. I don't really get that anymore. We have come a really long way, but I think it's really important to keep pushing to see where we can go. And just on your point, Britt, about the next generation of little girls, it's really important for the next generation of little boys as well, that they grow up in a world where it's just known that you can play sport. You can play all your favourite sports, no matter your gender.
Yeah, there's something I noticed, Riss, when watching the Matildas and things like that. You see little boys in the crowd and they've got Kerr jerseys and like Knight. They've got all the girls on their jersey. And that was something when I was younger. Never happened.
It's such a new phenomenon, and one of my favourite things at the World Cup in 2023 was when Sam Kerr was stepping up to take her penalty, they cut to the crowd and it was 3 little boys, arms around each other, and they're like, come on Sam, you can do it. You wouldn't see that 5 years ago because the crowds were smaller. For whatever reason, parents weren't taking their little boys to Matilda's games, and now it's just a completely normal, acceptable thing, and it's awesome. Like, as Mary said, we want all kids to be watching all Australian teams. We want them to be supporting their local clubs in whatever code they happen to be watching. So it's really pleasant to be in a space where, generally speaking, little boys, men are watching women's sport, and they're watching it with passion, with excitement, and with knowledge as well. So hopefully it's a continuing trend.
One thing I think, when a lot of, I guess, the chat around how we grow women's sport, it always comes back onto women. What can women do more of? When realistically, who is in these positions of power? Now that we're seeing a lot of young boys and men as well in general, I think it kind of almost, we've got to pass a baton on a little bit now. I think a lot more men need to step up and probably acknowledge that, the women's game isn't meant to be the same as the men's. I watch rugby and I watch the Wallaroos and I watch Super Rugby women, and the game is different. Yes, they're hitting each other. They're throwing the ball backwards. There's kicking, there's passing, there's scoring tries, but the game is played differently. And I'm sure that's the same in NRLW, and I'm sure that's the same in AFLW. It would be the same in soccer, and it would be the same in basketball. So I guess the question here would be, what do we want to see from men?
Well, I'm happy to take that one. And
you go, Matt.
Isadora knows from being part of an AFLW club, which did it so well, the Giants, that it's men's programs getting behind the women's programs. And it's the people we work with in the media helping champion the stories and give a platform and give airtime. We're all there anyway. And I think, like Marissa was saying, it's just sport. It's not men's or women's. It's not little boys support men's athletes and girls support females. It's seeing it as one. And yeah, there are quirks, I guess, to the women's game. I know in basketball, perhaps it's not all shooting threes and flat out offense like it is in the NBA, but it might mean that it's more tactical, or there's an emphasis on defense and a more pure form of the game. So I think it's encompassing all of that.
I think that's funny that you bring that up, Megan, because you see a lot of comments these days online kind of deriding the NBA for moving so far away from that. And then you've brought up that that's what the women's game is about.
Yeah, I think so. And it's not comparing and saying, oh, well, women don't dunk or women don't shoot like this. I know a lot of men have coached and played and then come across to the women's game in coaching or analytical or commentary positions. And they actually love that it is very much about the fundamentals of basketball. So I think we should be shouting that from the rooftops and celebrating that rather than comparing it and playing it down.
Anything from you, Dawes? What do you want to see from men?
Oh, I guess probably, more support from also the male counterparts, going to games. When you see, I know on social media, the AFL women's posts, the boys at, an AFLW, it's kind of like, oh, that's nice to see. But I don't think there's a lot of that happening. I don't think there's a lot of, I think men can get more behind supporting over social media because that's the number one platform these days. And promoting games, reposting on a story saying the girls are playing this, there. I just think that would really help. Yeah.
You mentioned that end of last year, the Wallaroos were in South Africa playing WXV2. And Sia Khaleesi, the captain of the Springboks, he turned up throughout the whole tournament and he met all the girls, he met all the players across all the nations. He did jersey presentations and he had a really amazing point. So people asked him, why are you at this competition? Why are you there? And he just said, I have a mother, I have a wife, and I want to support these people. And these girls deserve all the respect that we get. And the only way that we can push these women forward is if we turn up. And, World Cup winner, 2-time World Cup winner, biggest rugby player in the world. And he's turning up to these events and he's proving exactly what we need to see more of.
Well said, Brett.
Oh, thanks, guys. We'll move on. I guess right now, what is there to be excited about women's sport? We were talking earlier, Mary, about the Women's FIFA World Cup and just what it did for the Matildas, but not just the Matildas, but women's soccer in Australia, but also broad stroke women's sport in Australia altogether. What are you excited about in the future for women's sport?
I love that in women's sport we keep creating new benchmarks. So I think about the ICC T20 Women's World Cup in 2020. Can't believe that was 5 years ago now. And the 86,000 people that turned up to the MCG to watch the Australian women's cricket team win that game. I feel like the FIFA Women's World Cup set a new benchmark. I guess what I'm really excited about is who's going to take the mantle on and set that next benchmark. And it's not going to be easy because I look at our domestic sporting market here and I think that football captures the nation in a way that probably no other sport does. I can't imagine a rugby league World Cup, as much as I would love it to be, being as big as the Matildas. So what is going to be that next benchmark? And maybe we need to look internationally.
Definitely. We've got a Women's Rugby World Cup coming up, 2029. But like you said, it's going to be so hard to reach that benchmark of what the Matildas managed to do and capture the imagination of the whole country.
But we should try.
Oh, without
we should just keep trying.
I think maybe we should focus on Katy Perry was here for the Cricket World Cup. Who's the next big name? Who will rugby bring? I think
they should just bring Taylor Swift. They'll sell it out every single game, won't they?
I mean,
I think we all want to know, who do you think, Britt?
Who I would want to come here.
We all want to know, Britta.
Yeah. I mean, I think if anyone's listened or look at my Twitter feed as of late, I would be very happy if BTS made their way to Australia. Shout out to BTS. Come on, guys. But, Riss, you'd be all about T-Swizzle.
I love Taylor Swift, big Swiftie over here. It was basically the World Cup of concerts for me. But speaking of the World Cup, I think it's interesting that you guys are in your respective sports are like, we need to live up to that World Cup benchmark, as Mary put it. For the Matildas and for football, it's kind of like, well, how do we reach those heights again? How can we kind of keep that momentum going? Because we're probably not going to ever host a Women's World Cup here again, or at least not in any of our lifetimes. So it's a really interesting problem that the people at FA, the people at the APL are trying to figure out, how do we keep that glow? How do we keep that momentum in football? I don't have answers. That's above my pay grade, but it's a really interesting thing to, I suppose, watch over the next few years.
Is that a bit of a cop-out, Riss?
So let's pay her more money. Riss can work it out.
Well, I mean, there's plenty to be looking forward to, but Riss, Asia Cup is coming.
Asian Cup is coming. It's very exciting. It probably is the closest we're going to get to recapturing a little bit of that World Cup magic. And I think it's really important because it is just Asian nations. We saw with the men's version in 2015, the diaspora communities who came out to support their countries. It was unbelievable. It was a party around the country. So I think we're hoping that we can recapture that energy in the women's edition and show that, football is a global sport. We're a multicultural country. Those two things should mesh well together.
Maybe I should be hoping that BTS comes for that.
Yes, that's a good thought, actually.
I'll start petitioning now. But what about yourself, Megan? What are you excited about?
I'm excited for the next generation of the Opals and basketball, women's basketball in Australia, and it starts from the grassroots where the participation numbers are huge. And I touched on earlier the post Lauren Jackson generation, the era, and I was just thinking about the Katy Perry, entertainment, Taylor Swift. We had a home World Cup in 2022, and I can't even remember if there was a performer. It was LJ was the performer. She was the draw card. So it's been more an on-court thing, and we've got more females than ever playing in the WNBA. We've got Sandy Brondello, who's just been reappointed as Opal's head coach after taking Australia back to the podium in Paris, but also coaching New York to their first ever championship in the WNBA. So look, not writing off any veterans that are amazing and still part of the program, but I think it's very much about what's next. And there's some great talent coming through, not only here in Australia, but coming through the pathways in the college system in the US. So I'm looking ahead to the future with a glass half full.
Dawes, we can't forget about you. What are you excited about?
Oh, it's all pretty much been said. But I guess the younger generation coming through, it was so inspiring to watch the Women's FIFA World Cup, and like the AFLW season was just after that. And I just thought it just set such a gold standard for what the AFL could be. And I guess it also put it under spotlight, which was of what they should be doing better. But yeah, it's exciting, and how every season just wants to be better, which is really inspiring to watch.
Yeah. I guess I'm excited to the idea of we've moved past just celebrating. We now have opened the door to be more critical, to look into these sports now and not be afraid to tell them where things have gone wrong, where things need to get better. We're not pandering anymore, which is probably perhaps a bit of a harsh term. But when these sports first started, when the AFLW first started, we probably allowed them a lot of wiggle room of what they were doing. But now we can kind of look at it and go, I don't know your thoughts, but my thoughts would be you expanded too quickly. And now we got to try and what do we do now to set it back on track?
Definitely. And even media outlets, like now coaches are being criticised on their game plan, which was something that never usually ever happened. So it's good.
Yeah. And I think a lot of athletes are embracing that.
I think it's really important, Britt. And I think in those early years, those competitions were just being established. There were new stars to be written about, new stories to tell. There'll always be new stories to tell, but we're in a position now where people know about the AFLW, the WNBL, the Australian women's cricket team. We need to start thinking about how we can be better, because that's how things do get better.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, on the theme of International Women's Day, the theme this year is about marching forward, bringing women forward. So in aspects of sport, we can go around the table. Who do you think, or who will, what competition will, who will march women's sport forward?
The sport that takes on the mantle of the FIFA Women's World Cup. Who's going to top it?
There we go. That was it. Dawes, how do you follow that one?
Someone who I've been, Sam Kerr is she's been around for a while and has been, the center point of soccer, but football. But don't want to make anyone else Bruce. But I'm more intrigued in watching people like Mary Fowler, so young, going over to England, and she's being a star, and it's really exciting to watch, and it's quite hopeful for other Australians coming up in the football world here. So, yeah.
I hope she didn't steal your answer, Riff.
She didn't. I was going to hark back to what we were talking about before about men and what they need to do to help us march forward. I assume for all of our sports, men are still predominantly in leadership positions, so we need them to lead. We need them to, create action. It's all well and good to kind of say they support, but we need to see that backed up. And to have vision for the women's game as well, because we know what it could be. It's about then those leaders taking us to that destination. So, men, it's time.
For me, it is the young players, the next generation across all of the sports and leagues and codes that we cover. I think they're not grateful. They have expectations and they know no different. So a lot of them haven't had to fight the fight or see the inequalities. It's just been sport. And I think that perspective is really refreshing. And I think they're energized, they know social media, they've got their own platforms and they're prepared to use them.
Yeah, I want to touch on the idea of platforms, and someone who I think who has done a lot of work in that area and will be a massive driver in the future is actually Chloe Dalton, former Australian Sevens player, now plays AFLW. You played alongside her, the Giants. She's the creator of the Female Athlete Project, and she has been one of the faces of, changing this idea around women's sport, calling out media outlets when they get things wrong, the first athlete to achieve something when women have done it previously. She's done a lot of stuff around that. And I think it's going to be someone like her. I think it's going to be, unfortunately, Megan and I have had this discussion before about women's sport being a passion project still in the media space. And I think there are going to be people on the sidelines who are going to still take up that role over the next few years and really own that space for women's sport. We mentioned that athletes now have their own TikToks, so their own brands, and they're going to be the ones who are driving it forward alongside these people who just love the game so much. You were one of them, Mary. You loved league so much that you created Women Who League. Like things like that. These people are the ones who are going to be driving forward. And I think they're going to be the ones who are going to make someone like myself, someone like Riss, Megan, Dawes, people who work in media actually stand up, make sure they get things right. Make sure that we're telling the stories, we're getting it right the first time, and we're driving this sport forward. I think we've kind of covered everything here, and I don't know if there's much more we could possibly talk about.
Oh, there always is, but maybe for another podcast.
But we didn't get quite the rage, Mary. I was expecting a bit more rage going on.
I'm more polite on camera, Britt.
But I think we've given a good idea of where women's sport in Australia kind of sits. And let's hope next year we'll have some more to talk about and we'll have progressed the sports in Australia a little bit further. Thank you so much, everyone, for sitting down and discussing all things women's sport in Australia. Thank you to Megan and Mary Kay for coming in and voicing your opinions. Briss, Dawes, thank you for your contribution. And
thank you, Britt.
Wow. But I hope everyone's learned something today. And we all march women's sport forward.